Hey, it's Soul, and welcome friends to Warcraft Weekly. The coffee and the copium have fully kicked in, and so hit the like button, subscribe to support this channel, and let's talk about the lizard-shaped elephant in the room, a possible Evoker support spec coming to the world of Warcraft. Is it what we think it is? No one knows for sure, but we're going to talk about it without giving spoilers, which is kind of hard, but the gist of it is that through some questing in patch 10.0.7 and some data mining from the 10.1 PTR and our very vivid imaginations, it's hard to ignore that something big is going to happen to Evokers in the near future, and that's going to translate into new gameplay options for us. So quick summary, and I guess, yeah, minor spoiler, the Dracthyr are biological experiments. They're living weapons that are apparently incomplete, kind of. While they have the powers of all 5 Dragonflights, they have fewer Black Dragon abilities. Like, baseline, they have Deep Breath, which is very iconic. Over in their class tree, there are 2 more Black Dragon abilities, Obsidian Scales, a defensive, and Landslide. It's kind of an AoE crowd control. In the near future, we can expect from the lore the Black Dragonflight to be restored, and I admit that I'm getting caught up in the hype that additional Black Dragon abilities may become accessible for Evokers in the form of a new spec. When it comes to the World of Warcraft lore and reveals, the narrative team is nothing if not very obvious with the direction that they're going in, although they still manage to do some misdirection at the home stretch, so to speak. Data mining has used terms like support and augment to describe what the Dracthyr are capable of with these Black Dragonflight powers, which strongly hints at a support role. If there's going to be another Evoker tanking spec, on the other hand, you would think that the hint would use words like protect or defend instead, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So today we're going to explore a couple of ideas. Is it possible that Evokers will get a support spec introducing a brand new role into the world of Warcraft? Or will it be a tank spec? Or will it be something else entirely that is arguably less exciting but also the most likely thing to happen? Alright, so let's start off with a support spec. Despite what the lore and data mining hints at, personally I think that this is the most exciting and also the least likely possibility. A support spec, or class, for gaming in general tends to involve the player committing very little damage, well, maybe only enough to make them viable enough for day-to-day outdoor adventures, but they contribute in other meaningful ways, like providing powerful buffs to allies and debuffs to enemies while offering a little bit of healing on the side. Depending on the implementation, there's potential for a support evoker to replace a healer in Mythic Plus, and everyone else in the group wouldn't have to worry about the interrupts or the crowd control. They can spec out of those for their own trees because the Evoker can handle all of it. Everyone else relies on their own self-sustain and their limited healing toolkits. But in larger group settings, then one Evoker could make a team of 20 players feel like a team of maybe 22, thanks to large group buffs that augment throughput or boost maximum health, and they'd have these numerous defensive cooldowns that are group-wide or for individuals. There are potential problems with that, and you probably heard some of this feedback a number of times already. When it comes to group comp and trying to join groups, breaking what they call the Holy Trinity, which is a tank, a healer, and a damage dealer, that has consequences. Now, it might be possible that a support role could replace a healer in some situations, but what if in the case of dungeons, what if the healer is still needed? Is that going to mean that groups are going to have to drop a DPS in favor of a support? Because in a world of Warcraft, where DPS is by and large the majority role that's represented, shoving support in there would feel really punitive because there'd be one less spot to compete for. On the other hand, World of Warcraft players are very easily influenced too. Like, if word were to get out that Evokers are really powerful or they don't contribute enough in Mythic Plus situations, things wouldn't go really well either way. Evokers would either be required or they'd be blacklisted from an entire game mode, but no doubt Evokers would feel required for raiding, which could feel frustrating for some groups. Everyone has reasons that they don't want to tank or heal or even DPS. Once the dust settles and the honeymoon phase is over for this new Evoker spec, not everyone's going to want to play support, especially not in a smaller group. So does that mean the group needs to force someone to switch or call an opponent Hug or at worst cancel the Raid Knight? Those are going to be new considerations that are going to come up, and I don't know if the benefits outweigh the challenges. I certainly don't think it's a great idea to introduce a new role in the middle of an expansion either. Like, if support specs are coming, I think it would be most responsible to bring it in during Season 4 of Dragonflight, when we can, mess around and get the kinks out before the next expansion. I also have doubts about a dedicated support spec because crowd control, buffs, and off healing are spread throughout all of WoW's classes, but I feel like I would be a lot more receptive towards a tanking spec for Evokers. Unfortunately, as said, there hasn't been many hints dropped, but Evokers do have Obsidian Scales that's already in-game. That's a defensive cooldown and part of the Black Dragon family. But I don't think it's so far-fetched to take the idea of augments and support and still apply it to a Dracthyr tank. They could still play the role of support, but they would also have aggro. So here's my vision of what an Evoker tank could look like. Like, it wouldn't hold a sword and shield necessarily. Like, it would still largely be focused on its magical abilities. It would still use intelligence as a stat, but an Evoker tank would use this magic essence shield thing or whatever as personal defense. So imagine them having a magical shield on top of their health bar that's still treated like health, so healers can fill it through healing, and defensives could reduce how much damage this magic shield would take, and commanding shout would make that shield bigger, that sort of thing. But it's largely the Evoker's job to try and maintain that shield, not unlike a Blood Death Knight, but just more emphasis on shield maintenance and not massive self-healing, despite it mechanically being the same thing. But the gameplay options would feel a little bit more similar to that of a Paladin tank. Now, for those who are familiar, Paladin tanks are a bit unique in that they provide a lot more group utility than other tanks. Enhanced tank versions of like Stampeding Roar, Commanding Shout, and Death Grip, now those are great tank utilities, but Paladins offer up strong healing options on demand. Like, their Word of Glory will pretty much bring a target to full health while also healing themselves, and their passive group healing does really strong long-term healing that indirectly saves a lot of healer mana. An Evoker can do something similar. If an Evoker tank were to apply like damage reduction bubbles to the team, that's some pretty powerful utility. The same goes if they're able to temporarily apply damage boosts and resource generation. Like, it would also be cool if an Evoker tank could use Deep Breath to enter a fight over yonder and then damage, the damage will temporarily stun enemies. Or they could use it to get aggro and then use the button to return to their original position for a safe line of sight pull. So yeah, I think we could have a male tank that still uses intelligence as their main stat. It would be a class that already has a wide variety of baseline abilities, including castable and empowered spells, which probably means that they're not going to take any tanking penalties while doing these empowered abilities. They could use Deep Breath to pull mobs, and Azure Strike for basic attacks and cleave, the occasional Disintegrate and Fire Breath, and then they would spam one of those things or something else to maintain their essence of shield. Talents would make the Evoker better at either personal defense, group buffs, or defense and enemy debuffs to protect the team. So I think this can be viable. The only wrinkle that I would see is that tanking trinkets would now need to support all the primary stats. But if not Evoker tanking, and if not Evoker supports, is there a third possibility for an Evoker spec? I think so, and while it's a less exciting option, I also think it's very possible that Evokers would get another spec that is primarily DPS, but just happens to offer a lot more support options than the Preservation or the Devastation spec. Given how much the other flights are already represented, this third spec would focus mostly on Black Dragonflight themes, but still have talent spec options that let the user lean more heavily into a support role. It's important to point out that the talent revamp in Dragonflight was game-wide, but Evokers are the first class that were born into this talent system. So if you look, they already have a lot of baseline abilities that are supported by the class tree, while the spec tree introduces these spec-specific abilities that are clearly themed after the flights. It makes creating a new spec easy to do, kind of. Okay, it's not easy, but the direction seems pretty clear. I can imagine a caster that focuses on earth-based abilities, and okay, here are some wacky ideas that really aren't worth reacting to. So, like summoning little golem dudes that chuck rocks at enemies, or they can create, I don't know, earth turrets, pew pew, like people can run behind these turrets for a bit of damage reduction, or I don't know, maybe the Evoker can pull up like this, like an earthen wall that the Evoker puts up and people can run behind it for some damage reduction. Or how about, I don't know, how about enchanting people with an earth armor thing that makes the buff target deal extra earth damage and it absorbs damage taken. Like, I'm trying my best to not make this sound like an Ellie shaman. I'm probably not doing so great of a job, but who knows, maybe this could be, instead of a caster, it could be more of a mid-range melee class that's not unlike a survival hunter too. So still a DPS spec, lots of support options where taking up a few of them would be good for small groups, or taking up more would benefit a large team. The reality, though, is that while it's pretty obvious that something wild is going to happen to Evokers, we still don't know enough to really say anything yet, so stay tuned, and until then, I'd like to know what you think. Oh my god, Blizzard is ruining Mythic Plus! That is the reaction from some folks this week after the WoW team unveiled new changes to Mythic Plus affixes. The likes of Quaking and Volcanic and Grievous are going away in Season 2 and are being replaced by new affixes, Entangling, Afflicted, and Incorporeal. Meanwhile, with explosives, fewer of them will spawn, but will have a lot more health, to where they're basically like extra mobs in the pack, but at the moment they're still immune to AoE and cleave damage. These are all level 7 affixes that I'm talking about, by the way, and the level 4 affixes remain unchanged. I talked about this throughout the week already, from very early reactions to after learning more through data mining, but now that it's testable on the PTR, I want to share some initial impressions that people have had. I also want to discuss how poorly this reveal was handled and how it could be better in the future. First, the affixes themselves, starting with Explosive. Big pulls are no longer going to result in like a bajillion explosives or similar effects happening all at once. It actually caps out. However, once the initial explosives are cleared in this case, new ones are going to pop up almost immediately depending on how many mobs were pulled. So it's kind of like other explosives are waiting in queue to appear. So while you don't deal with a lot of them at once, you still deal with a lot of them unless you mow the mobs down and you force the healer to just deal with multiple explosives being ignored. Needless to say, in this first build, I'm not too fond of the change to explosives because of just the sheer amount of damage that you got to do to them directly, meaning that you're not DPSing the actual mobs. That, or the strategy is going to end up being like, okay, pull as much as your healer's cooldowns can handle, let them drink up, and then do the next big pull. So I hope that they could at least remove the AoE and cleave immunity, so that way DPS can like kind of target explosives and then cleave off mobs. It's going to give more options with how to handle explosives, which would make me still not like how I'm playing the affix more than I'm clearing the dungeon. It's like they added teaming, but they explode. So I'd say lower the health value a little bit more, let them be AoE down, but still have to give them some attention, but yeah, that's my 2 cents so far. Watching social media, Afflicted seems to be the favorite out of the 3 because of how easily it can be handled and also how it alters player behavior in a fairly positive way, because everyone can and should help. A small number of mobs are going to appear and you have to either cleanse it or heal it to full life within 10 or so seconds, otherwise bad things happen. In one sense, it's a healer's job to cleanse or mass dispel or heal the targets, sure, but it's arguably more efficient for DPS and even tanks to divert a few points into cleansing, since theirs will work just fine too, and this makes quick work of the affix. Entangling is a snare, not a root, that forces the player to move 10 yards from the center, and failing to do so will stun them. Fortunately, it's the kind of debuff that can be cleansed with the likes of Blessing of Freedom and other abilities that remove movement impairing effects. I think this one's easy, especially as a paladin, but of course there are concerns about being entangled during a critical moment where you've got to run away. Now, off the top of my head, I can't think of any mechanics in the upcoming dungeons that would make entangling 100% fatal, at least not as long as you're on top of moving out of bad stuff the moment that you're aware of it, so finishing that cast is probably not worth it while this affix is up. What I like about this one is that it is totally personal. It's not like Quaking or Thundering that require awareness or where others are going, and as a reminder, both of those are going away. And if there is a situation where entangling is fatal, hopefully it will be identified and addressed quickly. Incorporeal seems to be the most frustrating so far due to the bugs and I guess the overall difficulty, although when I look at it, it seems pretty easy to handle. Several mobs are going to appear and will start an 8-second cast that, when completed, throws a nasty debuff on you, but it can be CC'd by virtually anything, from roots to sheep to turn evil and even scare beast. They can also be kicked, so for these mobs that appear for about 20 seconds or so, they only really need to be CC'd until there's only about 8 seconds left in their life. I'm not so sure that they move either, so their cast can be line of sighted too, and you could just kind of go around and ignore them. Unfortunately, sometimes CC hasn't worked and it's bad times all around, but hey, bugs happened. What we saw this week was what I thought was a mishandling of a very important announcement on the WoW team's part, followed by knee-jerk reactions that spread like a California wildfire. The current discourse challenges the very nature of what Mythic Plus is designed to be, according to the WoW team at least, versus what some vocal critics want Mythic Plus to become. Now, I like to keep an open mind. I mean, maybe changes will happen as players pound at the gates demanding change. So let's talk real quick about these two sides, I guess. The stance from the WoW team has been pretty clear from the start. They designed Mythic Plus to be an alternate endgame. It's not meant to be run by just a group of randos who have no familiarity with each other. It's supposed to feel as coordinated as any raid group progressing through an instance, which is a very subjective thing as well. It's meant to offer greater challenge for greater rewards, and the challenges come in the form of affixes that serve as the additional role of helping these same couple of dungeons feel refreshing, as people run them non-stop for like 2 or so years. Seasonal affixes came shortly after to up the variety even more, and now we're in the middle of this new shift, where seasonal affixes go away and the entire dungeon lineup changes every 6 or so months. So greater challenges, greater rewards. It supports a long-time sentiment from players that the best rewards ought to come from the toughest challenges. And at the very top of the skill band is this ongoing debate over whether Mythic Plus ought to be more rewarding than Mythic Raids, but that's a different thing altogether. Naturally, the community responded to the challenges by being gamers and going around them. Raider.io was invented to support pickup groups, and for better or worse, players created for themselves a way to better ensure that their pug is that winning team. Add-on writers created easily updatable maps with routes to ensure efficient pulls. Add-ons have gotten crazier, and we've gotten tons of feedback over the worst affixes while tolerating the rest, I guess. Over time, players would hear the WoW team talk about challenge, and they would twist that word into punishment, and that's how some look at Mythic Plus affixes these days. A series of unfun annoyances and punishments meant to slow down our gearing to up engagement and prolong subscription time. Do you see how easy it was to go in that direction? And there's a growing push for positive affixes, aka kiss curse affixes, that reward players with throughput as long as they play the affix right. That's what most of the seasonal affixes were. They were potential time savers that carried risks. There's also a call to remove affixes altogether and just focus on the damage scaling as you go from key to key. Now, I don't know if these folks have thought it through, that they probably won't be able to run like just 16s and still get mythic level gear without affixes. We would probably have to run the equivalent of 25s to get that same sense of challenge. There's that word again, that would offer an appropriate reward. Now, those are perfectly okay takes to have. I also kind of lean towards focusing more on seasonal affixes while taking everything else out except for maybe Tyrannical and Fortified. Oh, they're gonna hate me for that one too. I just wonder what would be the reverberating or long-term effects be if Mythic Plus was, and again, y'all gonna call me out for this one, if it was oversimplified. For example, raids become more complex and more challenging at greater difficulties. If Mythic Plus is just Mythic dungeons that hit harder, should Heroic and Mythic raids be normal raids that also hit harder and offer no additional complexity too? Or should the likes of faded affixes from Shadowlands be the one thing that makes a raid heroic or mythic? Because it'd be pretty unfair that Mythic Plus could be infinitely run, was arguably way easier, and gave gear equal to Mythic raids. There seems to be an imbalance there, and you see, yeah, I did end up going into that raid versus dungeon conversation. I'm not here to give too strong of a personal take one way or another. Like, I'm the kind of gamer that just rolls with it. I'm going to adapt, I'm going to get my KSM and AOTC, and then I'm going to go mog hunting. But I do feel very, very strongly that the WoW team needs to continue improving their communication, especially when it comes to big announcements like this. What they have been doing with dev notes and early announcements has been a marked improvement, you can't deny that. The preview that we got gave information, but it just wasn't enough, I don't think. In fact, naming one of the affixes entangling while we have a spell called entangling roots, which is a root, it turned out to be pretty misleading, despite it being described as a snare right there in the post. Now, if it was called snaring, people would still complain, but it wouldn't be for the wrong reason. But in the case with the affixes, I think it would have been very helpful for them and for us to really get in front of this and do like a developer feature video or a live stream like, "Hello, I'm Mr. WoW Dev, and I want to share what we're working on for Season 2 of Dragonflight, Embers of Neltharion." And you know, the dev will showcase and describe the new affixes like, "Hey, this one's called Afflicted, and here's how it works. We can see, you know, video on how it works, blah, blah, blah. Cleanse this, heal that, address some anticipated questions, move on to the rest, and then remind folks that this is all a work in progress and to send your initial feedback to a thread, yada, yada, yada." By them showing us more early on, even if it's a work in progress, they can set the narrative, even if it's only a day ahead of time. It feels like that matters. And that's the show. This week, I've run more time walking than I think I've run in like the past 2 or 3 expansions put together, and it's been quite the adventure. I've been exploring the different healing specs, and as someone with like no experience, I know I'm not being particularly challenged by time walking dungeons, but I am enjoying how liberating it feels to mess with a class and not worry about the gear that I get while leveling because, well, 1, it's low level anyway, and 2, it all gets scaled down to time walking level regardless. So I actually have like item level 120 gear on my level 60 something character, but I'm fine because when I enter time walking, it goes down to that level. Unless I accidentally queue for a normal dungeon and then it's bad times all around, but oh no, I'm in the wrong part of town. Oh no, Soul. This week and this patch so far has been pretty chill. I have like 6 rings on my main, like more than enough to goof around with. We've got this time walking holiday happening. We got free stuff from Amazon Prime and Prime Gaming subscribers if you want to mount from the trading card game. And supposedly there's going to be more to come. And while I prefer Twitch drops that people don't have to subscribe to a thing to pay for, more stuff is more stuff. And speaking of, I want to thank the amazing folks over on Twitch who let me keep them company, and I'm grateful to the folks who chose me to hang out with for their disco toy thing. You could have chosen literally any WoW stream, but you picked me, and I'm grateful. And also to our beloved patrons, y'all keep the coffee flowing, and we've got new folks. Dexterity of 20, welcome back. Isaac, thank you so much. But of course, we also can't forget about you, viewer who made it to the end. You helped feed the algorithm. So don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more of me running my mouth, catch me live, and I'll catch you later. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.